What up, dudes? It's Gaz, and welcome back to the Warframe video. So, we're finally talking about the Riven Disposition changes that came out with Nidus Prime last week. I know, Plaguestar actually was that exciting that I did not do the Riven changes first priority like I usually do. But to be fair, it was a pretty packed update day. Alright, so we're going to be going over what got buffed, what got nerfed, and some, after effects, some things that you can look at if you look a little bit deeper into these things. Going over the Riven changes. So before we get into it, make sure you sub to the channel and all that stuff. We're going to have some gameplay of the Cronin Prime in the background. Because I'm actually going to probably make some more melee videos coming out pretty soon. Because, things are pretty much the same as before, but a couple things have changed. So let's get into the Riven changes. These are going to be on the forums they posted it. And we've got it actually separated into primaries, shotguns, rifles, secondaries, arc guns, and melees. Okay, so let's start at the top. That's the way they put it in the direction. So going over the rifles, let's read over their explanation too, because keep in mind, Riven's come out 0.5 dispo nowadays, which is kind of lame, but it is what it is at this point. Like, us complaining about it, they need to literally be losing money to actually make any of these changes, okay? And let's change the red crits cannot be seen easily, but we can briefly go over it. Okay, so, reading their description. Nidus Prime Access brings the Master of Mutation to the Origin system. Riven mods are of a similar sort, constantly mutating and evolving, and this Prime Access is no different. The Sisters of Parvos update introduced many new powerful weapons. The Tenet series, which caused a period of volatility in usage stats. We are still evaluating the strength of these weapons, but have done our best to add power where it seemed appropriate. We've also taken this opportunity to slightly change how we calculate Riven values internally, in terms of the tools we use. This change, combined with shifting trends, means that Disposition updates adjust more numbers than usual, but nothing too extreme. Keep in mind, he did not mention anything about the Galvanized mods or the Merciless Arcanes, or primary Arcanes. So they mentioned they added new weapons to Sister of Parvos, and that was influencing the usage stats, but I feel like they definitely should have put a paragraph in here referencing the really, really crazy gun buffs we got, not to mention the melee nerfs. I mean, you can say the melee didn't get nerfed all you want, but objectively at the end of the day, they changed how much damage you get per stack from Condition Overload. That's damage you do not have anymore compared to back when this was not nerfed, alright? So you can't say it didn't get nerfed. It might still be really strong, but it did objectively get nerfed, guys, okay? Unless you just don't want to, accept the fact. Alright, let's go over some of these changes here. Actually, let's go over all the changes, and we'll talk about them briefly. Alright, so as far as rifles, the Amprex got a small buff. You're probably not going to see much of a difference on your Riven with the Amprex, but, the Amprex, from our video we made a month ago or whatever, it is kind of underwhelming feeling. We do need a Tenant Amprex to make this thing feel better, so there you go. I mean, it still has problems, unfortunately. Batacore going from 1.05 to 1.1. Honestly, the Batacore already had good Rivens and could hit enemies really, really hard, so, even higher crit chance, even higher crit damage, even more multi-shot. Batacore is a sleeper weapon for sure, if not a little bit unwieldy to use. The Boltor, Telos Boltor, and Boltor Prime all getting Riven buffs. Those things are all trash. At least the Boltor Prime still looks cool, but until they actually buff puncture damage and puncture status effects to do something more important or useful, these weapons will be remaining in the meme tier, useless weapons. The Tenet Flux Rifle, one of the new Tenet weapons. I have not made a video on this yet, but it's basically a slash proc monster. It's going to be getting a Riven buff, so good. It's a brand new weapon, got a 0.2 Riven buff, so a pretty big one, honestly. And if you are down for a single target weapon, go for it, man. The Fulman, we have a video of this on the channel as well, going from 0.65 to 0.7, a very powerful weapon, doesn't even need a Riven, but maybe the Rivens will be somewhat slobbable if they keep getting buffed like that. The Gaze Primary, a weapon I keep bringing to make videos on the channel. This thing's really good. It's one of the best primary kit guns, I'd say, and it is getting a Riven buff. It already had really good Rivens at neutral, so we'll take that. We take those. Comarex was in my top 10 primaries to look out for in the Sister Parvos update, getting a Riven buff. This thing is a monster, as predicted, and the Rivens are even stronger. Now, the Rivens on the Comarex are good because this thing has low crit chance at base, so giving you increased crit chance can be really helpful in the Comarex. The Lanka, no one really uses the Lanka anymore, but I guess that one guy still playing Mag with the Lanka out there will appreciate this very small Riven buff from 1 to 1.05. The Kuva Ogress getting a very, very tiny Riven nerf from 0.9 to 0.85. I don't think it's going to even be noticeable, but it's just kind of funny that they out of all the things they choose the Kuva Ogress, the thing with no crit at all. Let's take a quick look at the Kuva Ogress Riven I have and just see if I even notice any differences. If it's like offensively worse, sure, I'll probably notice it, but honestly, I'm not expecting to see anything too much worse here. So, you've got Ogress Satyata. So with no negative, you got 125% damage and 69% multi-shot. Honestly, like that pushed it down to below 70% multi-shot. How that stacks with Galvanized Chamber, they kind of like ruined my Riven a little bit there. So thanks, DE. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I consider if you want a multi-shot Riven, you want to make sure that the stats can get above 70%, so you can have that that reliable like 300% multi-shot. All right, going on here. So that's like the only rifle that actually got nerfed is the Kuva Ogress, hilariously. The Opticore Vandal, you know, pretty slow weapons, all things considered, but getting a Riven buff nonetheless. Panthera Prime, it just can't win, dude. They keep buffing the Rivens, and it's still not meta, but you know, it's a somewhat reliable slash proc machine. I do consider the Panthera Prime needing a crit chance Riven, or you could just do the Avenger combat discipline trick. It has a crit chance problem. I've always thought that. The Proboscis Cernos. Did I say it right this time, guys? Let me know in the comments down below. Went 0.55 to 0.6. Still like a very, very low Riven disposition weapon, but that should get it above 60% multi-shot, or 70% multi-shot in some situations. Normal Rubico getting a small Riven buff. The Rubico Prime stats are really, really high, and I'd still just say use the Rubico Prime if you have it, even with the low Riven dispo. Soma and Soma Prime, it's not 2018 anymore. Just let it die. I'm sure you still like your Soma Prime very much. Person that thinks that new Soma Prime mod is god tier, but you know, the rest of us have moved on way past that. The Sporothrix, yes, the Sporothrix. I did make a video on the Sporothrix with Arcane Avenger and with the Adarza Kavat, just you know, forcing it to crit. With that, it got a Riven buff again. So let's take a look at how big the crit multiplier on my Sporothrix Riven is, or rather the build is, with this additional crit chance multiplier. Because remember before, it was like, I think it was like 13 point something before with the crit chance multiplier being super, super high. So let's take a look now. On the build in the video, I believe it was, okay, so we went from like 13.7 to 14.2. So, you know, that's a pretty high, that's a lot of crit damage right there. 192% and 142% multi-shot. That's pretty good. Let's take a look at these other Sporothrix Rivens right here. So the damage in Heat 1 is going to have 263% damage and not 100% minus impact yet. Well, although I think you get 3 stats of the negative goes higher. So that might be 100% minus impact. And we've got Heat and crit damage. Dan, the crit damage is a lot lower on this one, 179 versus my God roll one, 192. So, you know, these Rivens probably aren't really slottable, to be honest. But the Sporothrix, hey, you know, if you want to watch that video on Ash with the Sporothrix against level 10,000s, be my guest. It is not the best weapon in the game. It has 1% crit chance, but, you know, you can work around it. Stalta, we also have a video of this on the channel. Really good weapon, getting a Riven buff. I'll take it. You kind of want an Elemental on a Stalta Riven to fit everything on there, but, you know, even more crit chance, sure, dude, I'll take it. Super Vandal, just, you know, generic assault rifles, getting a buff. I'd say every generic assault rifle in the game should be getting a buff. Hey, look, they remember that Tenora Prime existed. Last Riven Dispo pass, they buffed the Pandero Prime's Riven disposition and did not buff the Tenora Prime's Riven disposition. But they gave it a gigantic buff to 0.8 from 0.5. So they're probably slottable technically now. The whole Saberis family getting a buff. The whole Saberis family is, you know, I'm going to go ahead and say it's better than the Boltor family, but they're still not really worth using in the grand scheme of things. Of course, if you think they look cool, go for it, man. The Tenet Tetra, that weapon that had bug damage fall off at launch, and people paid big money for Rivens, it got a big Riven buff from 0.5 to 0.7. So enjoy that if you are a Tenet Tetra fan, because I know there's some of you out there. Still a really good weapon, honestly, even with the damage fall off being fixed. Tiburon Prime, one of the poster boys of really, really high Riven disposition when it got launched. It's been nerfed so many times at this point. They're buffing the Tiburon Prime disposition to almost neutral. I'd say maybe buff it a little bit more, and I'll start using Tiburon Prime again. But potentially, it's still single target for the most part. Tombfinger Primary, I keep forgetting to make a video on this too. Tombfinger Primary, it's really good. Now I've made a new build on it since this initially got released, and they nerfed all the parts that people were using. I've gone with a higher fire rate version now, and 0.9 dispo is pretty good, since this thing has really high base stats in the first place. Hilariously, the Trumna gets a Riven buff. A lot of this stuff, like, we make videos on the good stuff in this game. The Trumna is already one of the good things, and they got a Riven buff. So if you have a Trumna Riven, congratulations, it's even stronger. I don't see it going up much more from here, honestly. 0.8 is pretty good for Trumna. That thing is like a destruction machine. So yeah, I'll take that buff. And, you know, There's a Trump video on the channel if you want to one-shot some Acolytes. The normal Vectis getting a Riven buff from 1.05 to 1.1. I'm sure someone out there that likes Eidolon fights probably appreciates that very small minimal buff. And hilariously, the Kuva Zarr gets a Riven buff. And not just some meme tiny one. It goes from 0.5 to 0.6. So the Cerberus normal went from 1.25 to 1.3. The Kuva Zarr got its Rivens buffed more than the normal Cerberus. So, okay. Alright, dude. I mean, it didn't even need a Riven, but I'll take it. Kuva Zarr, one of the best weapons in the game. Sure, dude. So, overall, those are really good rifle changes there. The Kuva Ogress got nerfed for some reason, but, I think we'll be okay with it. Moving on to shotguns, we've got the normal Archiplasmor. Keep in mind, this is not the Tenant Archiplasmor. Honestly, the normal Archiplasmor has much lower stats than the Tenant version, so keep in mind, it's not like this change might as well not even happened, honestly. You're not going to be getting 100% crit chance with a crit chance Riven. You're not going to... I mean, maybe someone out there that still likes the normal Plasmor could use it if you have like a really, really good Riven, potentially. But, I mean, looking at these stats, like comparing the Tenant and the normal version, it's not even comparable. We're not even taking into account the Kuva bonus. But, like, on the normal Plasmor, with this crit chance Riven, we're at 86% crit chance. I wouldn't really bother, personally. But, hey, if you are, like, the magical unicorn person that still likes the normal Archiplasmor, I bet you're super, super happy that they got a 0.1 Riven buff. Let's go a little bit faster here. The Astilla and the Astilla Prime both getting Riven buffs. The Astilla Prime getting a big Riven buff from 0.5 to 0.8. So, Astilla Prime, honestly, we're going to have a video on it next week. It's pogging off a little bit right now. The Astilla Prime is really good now, and I'd recommend to pick one up if you don't have it already. The Cedo, ridiculous weapon with Condition Overload for guns, just doubling up on that. It's getting a Riven buff. Sure, I'll take it. It's a tiny little Riven buff, so you're probably not hardly notice it. But as far as Cedo Rivens, they still have the problem where it's a shotgun. And for some reason, shotgun Rivens have lower potential crit chance rolls than like rifle ones. So let's look at this Sati Visicron right here. Only 50% crit chance. But the multi-shot and the damage stats are pretty good. So that looks honestly bugged, to be honest. Like, you look at critical deceleration, this is 4 times the crit chance as a crit chance shotgun Riven with a negative. That seems wrong to me. I feel like that's something is definitely up. If we take it off, we're literally getting 10% crit chance from a crit chance roll in the Cedo. So they need to maybe change something behind the scenes with these crit chance rolls on shotguns, personally, if you ask me. All right. So continuing on, let's go over the rest of these changes. Probably should go a little bit faster here. I could talk about Rivens all day long, to be honest. So I gotta control myself. The Corinth normal going from 1.1 to 1.15. Corinth Prime is it does so much more damage per shot. On the alt fire, I'd say just stick with that. Kuva Hack, the single target Slayer, going from 0.5 to 0.7. We're gonna run the same problem here with the Kuva Hack. The crit chance rolls, they honestly just seem like they're bugged, because even with a crit chance roll on the Kuva Hack, the crit chance is not going to 100%. It goes to like 80 something. So let's just quickly show that. Good thing I have a bunch of Rivens, huh? So we look at the normal build, 69% crit chance. Put on a crit chance Riven, it goes to 80. It goes to 88. And look at how low that is. 83% crit chance with a 0.7 dispo weapon. That seems pitifully low to me, and I feel like it can't even go that much higher. So I still don't consider the Rivens really slottable. Maybe if you have like a crit damage, crit chance, multi-shot one, like the most god-tier Riven ever, maybe you could go for it. But I still have the problem with this thing where it has to reload after every alt-fire shot. So I'm going to stick with no Riven on this for now. Maybe another buff or two will change that for me. Or if they change how shotgun Rivens work. The Tigress, Sancti Tigress, and Tigress Prime all getting tiny little buffs. They're all the 0.05 buffs that we've come to expect out of these changes, and they're nothing really to write home about. I heard the Sancti Tigress is somewhat okay with a Riven. It is at neutral currently, so maybe go with a crit route or something like that. All right, so as far this is the weirdest change I've seen in a really long time on these Riven buffs. So we've got the pistols here. Now let's just, before we just go over all the buffs, let's look at the things that got nerfed here. We've got the Kuva Brock and the Kuva Twin Stubba. Why did they nerf these? They buffed the Kuva Zarr Rivens, but nerfed the Kuva Brock and nerfed the Kuva Twin Stubbas. These weapons were like okay, but they were not exactly meta at all. Like, they really weren't. They're single target weapons. I guess the Kuva Brock if you put punch through on it, maybe the Kuva Brock has some built-in punch through, but not enough where it's like, oh dude, it's breaking. Nerf it. It's got 0.5 punch through built in. So I mean, it's still got pretty high stat Rivens, to be fair, but I just don't understand the logic behind nerfing the the kuva Brock, but buffing the kuva Zarr. I mean, I'm not asking for a kuva Zarr nerf, but it just is like, who decided on this? Like, what? It makes literally no sense at all. And I don't even think it changes much either. It's very strange. But okay, we'll just move on here. So the Ak Bolto getting a small buff, doesn't really matter. Ak Jaguar Prime getting a small buff. These are, it's kind of, they're similar to the Ak Bolto Prime, but they're slash focus. So, you know, the ribbons were okay for the Ak Jaguar Prime already, so I'll take that. Still, this type of weapon, like the semi-auto, single-target weapons, they are really not exactly widely used, I feel like. Maybe for fun or for fast training, they're still used, but, I mean, even the Ak Lex Prime, it's not even full auto. It's semi-auto. It's really tedious to use this. And hilariously, the Ak Stiletto Prime, one of the most neglected weapons in the entire game, gets a pitiful 0.05 Riven buff. Have you looked at the Ak Stiletto Prime recently? I feel like, honestly, this weapon is, like, be criminally, like, devalued by DE. This is what is it at? 0.7 now? These stats are terrible, man. I mean, it's got 15% crit chance, a 2x multiplier, 30% stash chance, and it's mostly impact focused. This is terrible, man. Look at the Ak Samadhi Prime comparatively. Like, we lose 12% stash chance, but this thing has slash and puncture weighting, which is much better, and, like, you know, it's just better all around. The Ak Stiletto Prime could honestly use a revisit by DE, I'd say, because this is an old weapon. They look really cool. They're full auto. You can get stash chance out. That's a really old build, too. So, yeah, it's kind of funny they didn't buff it more than they should. That honestly should be a much higher dispo weapon than it currently is, if you ask me. All right. I'm really good at talking about stuff, huh? The Atomos, we'll have a video on the Atomos coming out next week as well, or maybe in 2 weeks. Getting a Riven buff. This thing actually is really criminally underrated. It's only heat focused, unfortunately, so you can't really get, like, you know, a bunch of stats effects on it, but the Atomos is pretty good as an AoE clearing pistol. The Catabalist getting another Riven buff. It is very good for single target, but that's the problem, is it's single target. I've said in the past, if they buff the Catabalist Rivens even more, it might be really, really powerful. It is really, really powerful, just single target, unfortunately, except when you throw the grenade, I guess. But throwing the grenade and manually reloading, I get really annoyed by it, so, you know, it is what it is. Lieutenant Cycron, wannabe Nucor, getting a Riven buff. It's got higher Rivens than the Nucor now, so, you know, it's creeping up a little bit. I did want to make a video on an Impact Tenant Cycron as well, so that might be coming out pretty soon as well. Mara Detron, Tenant Detron, getting some Riven buffs. I'd say the Tenant Detron's my least favorite Tenant weapon, so, I mean, this is not really going to change my mind, to be honest. Apparently, it's good for the Profit Taker, so there you go. Epitaph, the Sevagoth secondary, really good for proccing CO, getting a Riven buff. You won't notice it too much, but, you know, it's also really good for headshot, like, killing enemies, too. So, a good weapon that didn't even need a Riven buff, but I'll take it. Sure. Euphano Prime, lol, who remembers that even exists, getting a small Riven buff just to say it's on the list. Compressa, Yoreli's, Trash Bag's signature pistol, actually better than the frame itself, going from 0.5 to 0.75. I mean, yeah, it's got built-in viral, I believe, and you can do viral corrosive heat. Pretty nice, honestly. So that's a big Riven buff for the Compressa. Might need to pick up a Compressor Riven myself pretty soon. Pandero Prime, getting Riven buffs. The Pandero Prime actually hit really, really hard before, and, you know, giving it another Riven buff, I'll take it. I mean, my Pandero Prime hits really hard. I never made a video on this thing because it's single target. We don't really make videos on single target weapons on this channel, at least too often. But, you know, just taking a quick look at what we got here. Missing a mod slot, we've actually got, this is a Hornet Strike, and we've got about 3,000 damage, and that's without the crit multiplier, which is like a 7.5 crit multiplier. So you can honestly hit really, really hard with the Pandero Prime, and it's got good range and all that, so, you know, I do like the Pandero Prime quite a bit. We might need to, like, go all in on this build eventually to see how it shapes up, you know, even though it's single target. All right, just rapid firing a couple of these. Kuvasir, Sepulchrum, Tenant Diplos, Tenant Spirex, all, like, you know, okay enough weapons for what they are. Just getting a Riven buff. The Sepulchrum, honestly, you would think it'd be better, but I find the alt fire on the Sepulchrum very clunky and hard to use, honestly, so I still need a couple Riven buffs on the Sepulchrum before I'm even whipping that thing out, even considering whipping it out, so. Tenant Diplos, those things actually have some of the highest crit chance of any, like, dual-wielded full auto pistol in the game. I believe it's actually 100% crit chance with just Prime Pistol Gambit, so this will let you get, you know, further into orange crits. You probably won't see red crits unless you're running Avenger and a Darza still, but, you know, Tenant Diplos, okay for what they are. The alt fire, like homing shot thing, just remove it, DE. If you're watching this, you're definitely not watching this, but remove that stupid secondary alt fire thing. No one even cares about that. Tenant Spear X, people like this with an impact roll, just giving you hemorrhage stuff. I have a Tenant Spear X Riven. I don't really use it because it's a little bit slow and tiny AoE, but hey, if you like this thing, go crazy. All right. And then Prungrakados, Velox, Zocti Prime, and Zymos. Zymos got another buff. All right. D apparently doesn't know what the Zymos does, but it is a meme weapon, to be fair, so I guess they could just keep buffing meme weapons like the Zymos. If you have a good Riven with the Zymos, congratulations. I definitely do. And then here we go to melees. So as far as melees that got nerfed, we've got Glaive Prime, Cronin Prime, Nami Skyla Prime. 3 of the best slash proc weapons in the game, but as you potentially might be able to see in the gameplay footage in the background, the Cronin Prime still, this is with the Riven right here, the Cronin Prime still can just like slay the enemies. You don't even need a Riven really, but this is with a double crit damage Grineer Riven with minus stash chance. So, you can still red crit with these melee weapons. They're pretty powerful still, and unfortunately I'm not going to look at my Glaive Riven. I don't even want to look at it. If you have an initial combo Glaive Riven, this last nerf was the nail in the coffin. If you had to try a stat with a negative. If you get a dual stat with a negative, it might still be over 20, but my Riven definitely got wrecked, so yikes. All right, going over these changes. The Ankyros going from 1.45 to 1.5. Now, if you have an Ankyros Riven, you can actually use this as a stat stick, and it has the highest disposition in the game alongside the Amphis. So the Ankyros and the Amphis, the 2 highest Riven Dispo stat sticks in the game. Keep in mind, this is the normal Ankyros, not the Ankyros Prime. So if you can snipe a really cheap Ankyros Riven from Trade Chat or whatever, you can roll it and get a really good Korra stat stick, or whoever stat stick you're going for. Aram Spinoza, one of my least favorite weapons in the entire game, getting a Riven buff from whatever to whatever, because it's irrelevant to me. Atarax getting a Riven buff as well. It's still not going to make Maiming Strike come back from the dead, but thank you for the Atarax buff. Galatine Prime getting a Riven buff still doesn't matter. It's just, I'd say it's still worse than the Graham Prime, honestly. Galvacord, that electric whip that no one uses, getting another Riven buff, getting really, really high Riven disposition at this point. Halakar Wraith, a Wraith Boomerang, I'm pretty sure. Not really like a meta weapon, but it's actually pretty decent stats-wise. If you like the Halakar Wraith, you are a special unicorn, and yeah, good for you. The Kreska, which I believe, it's not like some kind of like soda or something like that? No. The Kreska, that's the really crappy boomerang. Okay, getting a Riven buff. It's just a stat stick, pretty much. Mios getting a Riven buff. Mios is a Blade and Whip that can actually proc slash pretty well, so good for that. And as far as the Nami Skyla Prime getting nerfed, it was one of the best dual swords in the game. Keep in mind how the dual ethers did not get the Riven's nerf, so maybe if you like the Nami Skyla Prime, switch over to the dual ethers. It's honestly up to you. Oma is getting a Riven buff from 1.15 to 1.2. Pretty good for electric gas build or something like that, but still it's not Cronin Prime, unfortunately. You can still kill level cap enemies with the Oma, though, don't get me wrong. Orthos Prime went from 0.65 to 0.7. Good for them. The Pulmonars, those infested nunchucks that no one uses, getting a Riven buff. Still not exactly a meta weapon, can't proc slash at all. It's got impact and viral innately. You can do viral corrosive heat, technically. Secure Electa, it used to be okay for farming credits. I guess you could still technically use it. The Tatsu, it just kind of got outclassed by the new Tenant, Two-Handed Nikana, and the Pennant. Just Tatsu, it fires off the Soul Swarm, that's kind of cool. But overall, not a big deal. And as far as the Tenant melee weapons, I feel like there's no actual excuse from DE. These should have gotten the maximum power buff because hardly anyone has these Tenant melee weapons. The Agendus was with the Sword and Shield, going from 0.5 to 0.55. That's not enough. You should have buffed it more because those weapons hardly exist for most people. The Tenant Exec, the Heavy Blade, which is mostly impact focused, going from 0.5 to 0.6. The Tenant Grigori, which is the Scythe. Hilariously, the Scythe got the biggest buff, but I'd say the Scythe is one of the best ones, going from 0.5 to 0.65. And the Tenant Livia, the Two-Handed Nikana we were just talking about, it went from 0.5 to 0.6. Unfortunately, for the Tenant Livia, you're going to really need a really, really good Riven to actually make this thing slottable. With mine, I have decent stats, but no negative, unfortunately, and I'd say it's not slottable currently. We're looking at, 19% attack speed? No, 23% attack speed and double crit, and those stats are not worth it. Honestly, I'd say Gladder might just better than this. Gives you a lot bigger crit multiplier. But technically, you could get a minus impact roll if you had an impact, like a 25% impact roll, to get mostly slash and puncture. But that's a really rare Riven that not many people have, if anyone at all. finishing off the last couple here, we've got the normal Venka going from 1.05 to 1.1, and the Vassalok going from 0.5 to 0.7. A attack speed Vassalok Riven will probably be worth running now, because you can just strip the armor even faster, or if you want to go for like a crit build with the light attacks and getting slash procs, be my guest. Vitriga getting buffed again. I mean, still waiting for it to actually be good. It's not the best. Volnus Prime going from 0.5 to 0.8, so good for the Volnus Prime. Still, you know, the fact they nerfed Blood Rush and all that makes this a little bit worse. It made the Volnus Prime a lot worse, actually, so still not impressed by the Volnus Prime. War going from 1 to 1.05, still not impressed by the War. And the Zenistar, I used the Zenistar the other day, but the Zenistar is trash nowadays. Never pick up the Zenistar unless you really have to for some reason. As far as the last weapons here, we got the Archguns, Prisma Dual to Kyrian, 1.05 to 1.1, not noticeable. Grattler and the Kuva Grattler getting some decent Riven buffs, or rather the Kuva Grattler got a bigger buff than the normal Grattler. I actually kind of like the Kuva Grattler, to be honest. So we might make a video on the Kuva Grattler eventually, but you know, 0.6 Rivens ain't really doing it much favors, especially since Archwing mods are pretty weak. Imperator and Imperator Vandal getting a buff as well. Nothing to write home about. It's very small buffs. And the other weapons, the Morga and the Larkspur, getting tiny buffs as well. I would really have appreciated a Mazelon buff, but, you know, it is what it is. All right, guys. Hopefully you found the video helpful. Like I said, there's things they definitely could have buffed some more and things that they shouldn't have nerfed, which is really strange. But, you know, that's the information right there. Hopefully you found it helpful. I'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.